So we all know Emily Henry, and if you don't, you're probably living in a hole, because right now she is one of the most popular, if not the most popular, romance / women's fiction authors who is currently alive. People are obsessed with her and her works and her romances. So the question that I had is why? Why are there so many people who are so infatuated with her stories and with her characters? Are they actually good books? Now, all of you know already that I have already read Funny Story, which is right here, and that I absolutely loved it. In fact, I would go so far to say as I adore it. And we will be recapping Funny Story again very briefly, but I mostly wanted to talk about the other Emily Henry books that I have recently read in order to try to answer the question, are these books inherently really good, or has the internet blown them up way out of proportion? Now, a little side note on this is I really try to go into books, especially books that have been hyped up a lot on the internet, with really tempered expectations. I really try not to let what other people have said online dictate how I feel about a book before I've even gone into it. Otherwise, I feel like you're really going into the book with expectations that really can't be met. Either you think a book is absolutely terrible and you end up really enjoying it, or you think that this book is going to be like the best book you've ever read, and it's just really hard to live up to such a large title, and that's a lot of weight to put on an author in a book that you may still really enjoy, but may not be the best thing that you've ever read in your entire life. So I really tried to go into this with reasonable-ish expectations on what to expect from these books. But it's kind of like not judging a book by its cover. You really try not to do it, but you're probably still going to do it a little bit anyway. So as I talk about these books, keep that in mind, that I really am trying to be completely unbiased as I go into these books. But with how much people talk about these books on the internet, it probably did have a little bit of influence onto my expectations before I went into these books. So we are going to talk about these books in the order that I read them, which would be this order: Funny Story, Beach Read, Book Lovers, and Happy Place. And hopefully at the end of this, you will not only know my rankings for each one of these books, but also know whether you want to read any Emily Henry books. And I will also at the end talk about a reading order for what I think is one of the best ways that you can go into her books based on my personal experience. If you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button down below so you can stay up to date with all of the conversations that we are having about books, and feel free to join in the comments with any thoughts that you have about any Emily Henry book that you have read and your thoughts on them. One more side note before we begin: there is one other Emily Henry adult romance book that I have not read yet, and that is People We Meet on Vacation. I do own People We Meet on Vacation, but I have recently read a lot of romance, like more romance in the past 30 days as I did in the past 6 months before that combined. And so as much as I wanted to read this book to give you a really complete view of all of these books before I posted these videos, I just felt like I would not be giving this book a fair shot if I read it when I was kind of burned out on romance and needed to go back to other genres. So I will be reading this book, and I will be reading it soon, and I will be getting her book that comes out in a couple weeks, Great Big Beautiful Life, as well. So maybe I'll do an updated reading order and ranking video once I have read both of those books. Now, the first thing that I feel like we have to talk about with Emily Henry is her writing. I personally really enjoy Emily Henry's writing style. She really makes me feel connected to the stories and the characters that she has created, and I am quite proud to say that I have cried over multiple Emily Henry books. And I say proudly because, to me, if you can get so deep in my emotions and get me so attached to these characters and to this story that when something unfortunate happens to them, it affects me and I cry and I grieve with these characters and for these characters, or when something good happens that I'm really excited for them and it makes me smile or laugh even out loud, then that is really good writing. And one of the things that I love most about Emily Henry's writings is her ability to describe emotions as different sensations in order to really describe what that emotion feels like internally, and even to differentiate between different kinds of happy, different kinds of grief, different kinds of complacency, all at the same time. And I am going to read you a couple of examples of this. For instance, in Happy Place, she describes laughing really hard in this way. My snort of laughter catches me off guard. even stranger, it doesn't stop after one. Instead, devolving until it's like popcorn exploding through my chest, until I feel almost like I'm crying instead of laughing. Or the sensation of blushing as, I wonder if my cheeks are nearing the color of a skin-tight chiffon yet. Or in Funny Story, where she describes being told that you are loved like this. He gives a surprised laugh. No, Daphne, that I love you. Hearing it again feels like swallowing a lit light bulb. It's little phrases like that that in my mind really set her apart from other authors, specifically romance authors, because the way that she's describing a feeling is more like how she is describing the physical sensation of having that feeling with other situations that, if you imagine it, they really do coincide with how it feels in that moment to have that sensation. So personally, I think that her writing is objectively good, even if you don't necessarily connect to the characters or to the story on a really deep and profound level. She is really good at her craft and what she does, and she is a really good writer. And so in that sense, I think that yes, these books and her writing are definitely worth the hype and are definitely worth looking into if you really like descriptive writing. Now jumping into the actual books themselves, the first book that I read by her was obviously Funniest Story. I read this in December 2024, and then also a couple weeks ago in February of 2025. This was her 2024 release. And I honestly just want to remind you guys how much I absolutely adore this book. This book, in my eyes, is a perfect romance. You have two characters who are completely lovable, who work really well together, and who have a storyline that is complex enough that their relationship is not shallow, and situations in life that are deep enough that they feel like real people. And rereading it again, honestly, only deepened my love for this book. It went from, of course, this is a 5-star, to this is probably a 6-star read for me. This book right now is absolutely my favorite romance of all time, and it is going to take something absolutely insane in order to dethrone this book in the future. In fact, I'm not expecting this book to get dethroned maybe ever, but if it does, not for years, because that is how much I love this book. That being said, do I recommend Funny Story to absolutely everyone? Not necessarily. There are a couple people who I would say you should probably think twice before starting this book. And it's not necessarily even just this book. I would say all of these warnings that I'm about to give you about Funny Story actually apply to every Emily Henry book that I have read thus far. But since we are talking about Funny Story right now, I'm just going to place it in Funny Story, but know in your mind that I'm actually talking about every Emily Henry book. First of all, if you do not like contemporary romances or you are not into romance books in general, then skip it. Obviously, like, don't put yourself through reading a genre that you know you don't gravitate towards if you don't like that genre. So if you're considering reading Emily Henry just because you want to know what the hype is about, but you don't necessarily like contemporary romance, then that's okay. Like, you don't have to read these books. It may be a cultural experience of what is going on right now in this time, but it's okay that you don't like contemporary romance, and just read the things that you enjoy reading. The second thing I would say is make sure to check all the trigger warnings of the Emily Henry books that you want to read before you read them. Now, the content that may be triggering is not usually super detailed or graphic in nature, but it is there and it is a part of the character's history in order to give them depth. A lot of her books have to do with issues with parents or issues with siblings or past hurts from past relationships, but for the most part, most of the things that would be triggering are difficult relationships with parents. So if that is something that is triggering to you, just make sure that you read all the trigger warnings and that it's a situation that you would be able to handle when going into these books. Again, they're not super detailed or graphic, but they are there, so be aware of that. Lastly, if you really do not like any spice at all in your romances, then I would skip Emily Henry books. They are not the most spicy romance books, but they are adult romances and they do have spice in them. So if you do not like reading about spice, then just keep in mind that these books do have it. I personally do not like spice in my books, but I really enjoyed these books and I found most of the spice scenes fairly easy to skip over. So you can either do what I did and skip over those scenes, or you can just avoid these books entirely, but they do have spice in them, so you do need to be aware of that. There also is some language in them, so just things to be aware of when you're making your decision. Also, I have seen a lot of people online talking about how parents are giving their children Emily Henry books to read when they are really young, like 12 and 13, because they have cartoon covers and they just look really innocent and cute. These are adult romance novels and there is spice in them, so do not give them to your underage children. That is just not a good idea. These are adult romances and there is spice. I cannot emphasize that enough. But getting back to Funny Story, again, I think that these characters are so well crafted. I think their relationship is so well crafted. It's believable. I love both of them so much. I love their situation. I think it's so fun. And yeah, before we move on to the next book, I'm just going to read the synopsis on the back so you will know if it's something that will interest you or not. Daphne has always loved her fiance, Peter, told their story how they met on a blustery day, fell in love over an errant hat, and moved back to his lakeside hometown to begin their life together. He was really good at telling it, right up until the moment he was actually in love with his childhood best friend, Petra. Which is how Daphne begins her new story, stranded in beautiful Waning Bay, Michigan, without friends or family, but with a dream job as a children's librarian that barely pays the bills, and proposing to be roommates with the only other person who could possibly understand her predicament, Petra's ex, Miles Norbert. Scruffy and chaotic, with for penchant for taking solace in the sound of heartbreak love ballads, Miles is exactly the opposite of practical, buttoned-up Daphne, whose coworkers know so little about her that they have a running bet that she's either FBI or in witness protection. The roommates mainly avoid each other until one day, while drowning in their sorrows, they form a tenuous relationship and a plan. If said plan also involves posting deliberately misleading photos of their summer adventures together, well, who could blame them? But it's just all for show, of course, because there's no way Daphne would actually start her new chapter by falling in love with her ex-fiance's new fiance's ex, right? So that's Funny Story. 6 stars, love it, love it. Obviously, my favorite Emily Henry book that we could possibly have because it surpasses 5 stars, so a little bit of a spoiler, this is my favorite. Now moving on to Beach Read. This is arguably one of the most beloved, if not the most beloved, Emily Henry book. This is also the book that skyrocketed her to fame in 2020. Before this book, she was writing young adult romances, and this was her first adult romance, and it absolutely took off and changed her life forever. And the summary of Beach Read goes like this. Augustus Everett is an acclaimed author of literary fiction. January Andrews writes best-selling romance. When she pens a happily ever after, he kills off his entire cast. They're polar opposites. In fact, the only thing they have in common is that for the next 3 months, they're living in neighboring beach houses, broke and bogged down with writer's block. Then, one hazy evening, one thing leads to another, and they strike a deal designed to force them out of their creative ruts. Augustus will spend the summer writing something happy, and January will pen the next great American novel. She will take him on field trips worthy of any rom-com montage, and he will take her to interview surviving members of a backwoods death cult, obviously. Anyone will finish a book, and no one will fall in love. Really. So what else do you need to know about Beach Read besides that? Well, first of all, this was her first adult romance. This was published in 2020, and her writing has changed quite a bit in the past 5 years. And while her writing is still excellent in Beach Read, you can really tell that she has honed her craft over the years, and her writing is on a whole nother level in some of her newer works. So keep that in mind when you're deciding which Emily Henry read that you want to read first, because the writing style has changed a little bit, even though they're all still good. Now, I personally gave this book a 3.5 stars. So that is quite a big difference from 6 stars from Funny Story, but hear me out, there are some reasons why I didn't necessarily love this book as much. I personally didn't feel like I knew these characters near as well as I knew the ones in Funny Story, and part of that was on purpose because Gus, the MMC, is supposed to be a little bit emotionally aloof because of some of the things that have happened to him in the past. But I still feel like I really wanted to know them deeper in order to not only love them deeper as individuals, but also to really root for them as a couple. And it's not like it was to the point where I wasn't even necessarily rooting for them to be together anymore, but I did feel like I couldn't root for them as much, and I wasn't as happy when they ended up getting together as I would have been if I knew their personalities a little bit better than I did. Now, for a lot of other people, this is their favorite book, and a main reason for that is because they absolutely love Gus. He's one of their favorite Emily Henry characters, and they absolutely adore him. I personally just didn't connect to Gus. I felt like I didn't really know him at all. So obviously that meant that it had a lower rating. I do think the premise of this book is still really fun, but it just wasn't necessarily a home run for me personally. So do I recommend this book? Yes, but only if you are an absolute romance book lover. Which brings us to our next book, which is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. You see what I did there? Now, one of the things that I feel like Emily Henry does really, really well is she has really differentiated her characters from one book to the next. And I think this is actually the greatest example of how all of her characters, especially her main characters, are completely individual, different people, and you don't feel like you're reading the same character over and over again. Now, in Beach Read, they are in a very small town in Michigan, and they are living a very small town life, whereas in Book Lovers, both of the main characters are from New York City, and they love New York City. Now, the majority of the book does take place in a small town, but they're always yearning to go back to the city, and there are quite a few scenes that are in the city as well. And these people felt completely and totally different from any of her other characters that I've read before. And so I do really commend her for being able to write a variety of characters and make them believable. I gave this book a 3.75 star, so it still wasn't necessarily my favorite, but I obviously liked it better than Beach Read. So I'm going to read the summary, and then I will tell you why I think that this book is a little bit better than Beach Read, at least for me. Nora Stevens' life is books. She's read them all, and she's definitely not that type of heroine. Not the plucky one, not the laid-back dream girl, and especially not the sweetheart. In fact, the only people Nora is a heroine for are her clients, for whom she lands enormous deals as a cutthroat literary agent, and her beloved little sister, Libby. Which is why she agrees to go to Sunshine Falls, North Carolina for a month of August, begs her for a sister's trip, with visions of a small town transformation for Nora, who she's convinced needs to become the heroine of her own story. But instead of picnics in meadows or run-ins with a handsome country doctor or bulging four-armed bartender, Nora keeps bumping into Charlie Lastra, a bookish, brooding editor from back in the city. It would have been a meet-cute if not for the fact that they've met many times and it's never been cute. If Nora knows that she's not the ideal heroine, Charlie knows that he's nobody's hero. But as they are thrown together again and again in a series of coincidences, no editor worth their salt would allow, what they might discover just might unravel the carefully crafted stories that they've written about themselves. So again, a completely different premise, a completely different characters, and I really did enjoy this book. And one of the main reasons why I enjoyed this book so much was that I loved Charlie Lastra more than Gus pretty much immediately. I felt like I knew him better than I knew Gus. And honestly, the same goes for Nora. I felt like I liked Nora and knew Nora better than I did January pretty much immediately. And part of that is because they had amazing banter and amazing bluntness in their relationship from the get-go. Now, of course, that is because they were from New York City and they had the very classic relationship of New York City people where they bump into each other and have a bad encounter a couple times, and then they say, you know what, I really don't like you, I think we're kind of enemies, and they build their relationship off of that, and it's just so fun. Nora and Charlie honestly are very, very similar people as far as lifestyle wise, and their likes and their dislikes and how they run their lives is all very, very similar. But it wasn't similar to the point where you felt like they weren't even compatible because they were too much alike. It honestly felt like they were similar enough that they would work well together. Now, the real balancing act in the characters came from Nora's little sister, which is Libby. She is honestly just as much, if not more, of an important character in this book than Charlie is. This is not just a romance book. This is actually probably 50% about sisterhood as it is about romance. And this book relies very, very heavily on Nora and Libby's relationship. And honestly, the third act conflict has zero to do with Charlie and has 100% to do with Libby and Nora. Though, honestly, not gonna lie, Libby was kind of a lot sometimes, but you kind of gotta love her. So I would recommend this if you really like romance books. Otherwise, honestly, I think you can skip it and you wouldn't be missing very much. This was Emily Henry's 2022 release. People We Meet on Vacation is her 2021 release, so this is the one that came right after Beach Read, and then she published Book Lovers. And then after that, she wrote Happy Place, which is the last book that we are going to be talking about in depth today. This is her 2023 release and probably her most beloved book since Beach Read. I gave this book a 4.5 star. So this is a big jump even from the last book, which I gave a 3.75 star. And I'm so happy that I love this book as much as I did. And I have 3 reasons why I love this book so much and why I give it a much higher rating than the other books. Harriet and Wynne have been the perfect couple since they met in college. They go together like salt and pepper, honey and tea, lobster and rolls. Except for now, for reasons they're still not discussing, they don't. They broke up 5 months ago and still haven't told their best friends. which is how they find themselves sharing a bedroom at the main cottage that has been their friend group's yearly getaway for the last decade. Their annual respite from the world, where one vibrant, blissful week they leave behind their daily lives, have copious amount of cheese, wine, and seafood, and soak up the salty coastal air with the people who understand them the most. Only this year, Harriet and Wynne are lying through their teeth, while trying not to notice how desperately they still want each other. Because the cottage is for sale, this is the last week they'll all have together in this place, and they can't stand to break their friends' hearts, so they'll play their parts. Harriet will be the driven, surgical resident who never starts a fight, and Wynne will be the laid-back charmer who never lets the cracks show. It's a flawless plan, if you look at it from a great distance and through a pair of sunscreen-smeared glasses. After years of being in love, how hard can it be to fake it for 1 week, in front of those who you know best? So the first reason why I gave this one such a high rating was because of the plot. The plot is just such a fun concept, and in my opinion, it was really, really intriguing. Before I even picked up the book, I was so curious how it was going to play out, how they were going to pull this off, especially in front of people that they knew so well. And so I was in before I even started the book just because of the plot line. And honestly, it did not disappoint. Reason number 2 is her writing, in my opinion, took a big step up from Book Lovers to Happy Place. There was just a completely different feel in this book than there was in Book Lovers. And I really appreciate the fact that she is so dedicated to her craft that she is continually really growing and changing and pushing herself to become a better writer, and it's showing in her work. And the third reason why I love this one so much is the emotional pull that it had. Now, I mentioned liking the plot line, but honestly, if I was in Harriet's situation, the jig would have been up in like 3 hours tops. Like, I would not have been able to deal with this situation at all. I would have been weeping immediately. Like, there's no way I could have hidden it from everyone for a whole week. I definitely wouldn't have done as well as Harriet for the whole week and really been able to pull it off to a certain extent, or at least fake it to a certain extent, and not like break down in tears like every single day or pretty much at any inopportune time. For that reason, I was like a little bit on the edge of my seat the whole time, because I know that I wouldn't have been able to pull that off. And so I was like, mad respect to Harriet for being able to pull it off at all. And so I was on the edge of my seat to see, when is this all going to fall apart? When is she not going to be able to take anymore? And how is this thing going to all fall apart when it does? I was so invested in this as the story was progressing, and there was so much build up to the confrontation. And so when chapter 29 hits, oh my gosh, I was weeping. I was losing my mind. I was not okay. All that pent up emotion of how I would have handled the situation, i.e. not near as well, was absolutely heart-wrenching. And I was sobbing while I was doing my dishes because I was listening to it on an audiobook. Now, this book wasn't technically perfect for me, obviously, because I didn't give it 5 stars, but it was very, very good, and I would recommend it even if you are not the biggest romance person in the world. I actually think this one is probably worth the read. So those are all my thoughts on the books themselves. My personal ranking, as you have already figured out, is this right here, with Beach Read on the bottom and Funny Story on top. Now, like I said, I haven't read People We Meet on Vacation yet, but if I had to guess where this one would go in this ranking, just based on what I know from the synopsis, I think it would probably go in between Happy Place and Book Lovers. But again, that's complete speculation. We'll find out when I actually read it. So this is how I liked them, but what is my recommended reading order for you? Well, I personally think that there is absolutely nothing wrong with reading them in the order that they were published, i.e. like this: Beach Read, People We Meet on Vacation, Book Lovers, Happy Place, and Funny Story. I think this is a great way to read them, especially if you are someone who really enjoys romance books. Then you can go from her oldest to her newest with pretty much no fear that you're going to dislike them. I think that most people do enjoy her books, at least to some degree, because they are well written. But my probably controversial recommendation for reading order looks very different than this one. And that is this order right here, starting with Funny Story, obviously, because I think it's the best. If you're anything like me, you want to know if you like her writing in general first, and so I recommend her new book first, just to know that like this is how she is as an author now, and then you can work back in time while feeling comfortable with the fact that you know that you already like her work, and that these may not be your favorite, but you know that you already like her as a writer. Now, I'm choosing Happy Place second because it's a very, very beloved book, and again, it has a different feel than some of her older work. It has a very similar feel in writing style to Funny Story. It's like a new era of writing I almost feel like that she's in, so I would recommend those. But you might be surprised to see Beach Read in the middle here, and I'm only putting Beach Read in the middle before Book Lovers, even though I liked Book Lovers more, because the majority of people actually enjoy Beach Read more than they like Book Lovers. I'm in the minority, so statistically you're more likely to like Beach Read, so I'm putting it third in this lineup, and then Book Lovers, and then People We Meet on Vacation last, just because I haven't read it yet, so I wouldn't necessarily want to put it above other books that I know how I feel about them already. If you just want to try out an Emily Henry book and see if you like them, I think this is probably the way to go. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please comment down below if there are any other authors that you would like me to do a deep dive on, so that you can know if they are worth your time or not. Thank you so much again for watching. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I will see you guys next time.